Topics may be triggering for some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised.
All right, welcome to Recovering with Friends. I'm Seth Fournier. I got Kayleigh Daly here as the co-host, and then we got some friends here in Jim Irish and Pastor David Willhoite. And I'll give you guys a chance to give a little 2 to 3 minute background on yourself. And so why don't we start with you, Jim?
My name's Jim Irish. I'm from Peru, Maine, and I'm an alcoholic drug addict. And I've been sober for about 4 years now. And it's treated me well. Really turned my life around, man. With the help from friends and the network and a 12-step program and the pastor here, and I'm just happy to be here tonight with you guys.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah, well.
I'm David Willhoite, and pastor of the Apostolic Church in Mexico for the last 32 years, and love the people of Western Maine. And I grew up in Augusta, but my dad was kind of a pioneer, so I've lived all over the place while Dad started churches around the world. And finally, the Lord called me as a young man and my wife Bobby to, we call it Western Maine, not just from Mexico, but Western Maine. And our lives have been pretty focused and dedicated on seeing people build a relationship with Jesus. And obviously, with that comes a lot of freedom from either addictions or broken marriages or just anything that would be bad relationships, bad habits. Lord setting them free from those things.
Thank you. So today I've been thinking a lot about this. I invited you guys in, and you're kind of two strong men that I kind of have got to know in the last few months and really look up to. When I just the dynamics here and the relationships to build, I was like, man, I think this is going to be so awesome to have on there. And when Jim was talking, I mean, I find Jim an anomaly. He's heavy into recovery. You're faithful, and you're a Hell's Angel. I think that's kind of really unique, and I think it brings some good perspective to everything. And then dealing with Pastor here, I've been down to the church, and I see what you've done for so many people and talking to them, and you have this way of, you're very religious, but you don't always do that. Like, you're there just to talk to somebody. It's not like shoved down your throat. And I see you like helping out a lot with the recovery community, and I just think it's so neat. And so I was thinking, like, how do we bring this all together? And so today, like, the only thing I really came up with is I want to talk balance. And we have that, like, so my first kind of question is for you, Jim. Like I said, that's kind of a unique role you have, or whatever, where you have all those three things in your life. How do you balance, like, being in the club, and then also your recovery and your faith? I mean, I think a lot of people, they're scared of recovery because of what they have to give up or everything else. So I see it in a guy like you that's balancing it all, and I'd just like you to kind of hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I wouldn't be in the club if I wasn't sober. I burned my life to the ground, and actually the club kind of keeps me grounded, keeps me responsible. When I prospected, I just got sober, and they tell you not to make no real big decisions. And I don't listen to anybody, you know what I mean?
Me neither.
And so it was hard at first, man. I run a little business. I've been in business 12 years, going on 13. And I think God's got a lot to do with the way I balance things. For a long time, my own will balanced it, and it wasn't good, It wasn't very well balanced, I make a time for my business. You gotta wear a lot of hats, And work takes up a big portion of my life. And when I'm not working, I love to club. Travel the country. The last 3 years, I've traveled across the country, not dozens of times, but a dozen and a half times, to all different sorts of places. And to be able to experience that sober has been quite the blessing. I'll find a AA meeting in a town I'll land in, and I won't tell anybody other than somebody from my charter that I'm going to a meeting, and then I'll see 4 or 5 other Hell's Angels there. And that's been really cool, going to all these different places. And I probably wouldn't have met them brothers had I not seen them at a meeting. Um, but balance is tricky, man. I think if you're living in recovery and really working at it, it comes easier every day. But I spend a lot of time in prayer and meditation. I take time twice a day, sometimes 3 or 4, depending on what kind of day I'm having. Well, plumbing can get to you sometimes. Uh, but yeah, that's my approach at it.
I think that's really pretty cool too. How you're talking about like running and meeting other brothers, as you say, in these meetings and stuff like that. And I mean, I don't know. It's like there's a stigma attached to recovery, but there's also a stigma attached to that. Like that's not something I'd ever think of. So seeing how like can be in that like subculture, I guess you would call it or whatever, but you're still going the right. I think that's inspirational to people.
It's dedication
Dedication.
to everything.
Yeah. And then when I come over to you, Pastor, as I was talking about it a little bit before, about like that balancing being a godly man and everything else, but still being able to balance and talk to people where they're at, not having to be there. Like, how do you find that balance? Like, how much, because I've had a few interactions with you and we've talked about God and Jesus on several occasions, but I've also talked to you about motorcycles and you were buying a truck and we were just talking about moving furniture, I think. So it's like you meet people where they're at, and that kind of really drew me in personally. That was a lot of reason I had a lot of respect, and I've ended up going over to your church the last few weeks and stuff. Lots of times it comes across as judgmental when you with religious people, and
He's
I've
not
never.
religious. I don't think he's religious. He's not religious.
But I,
But-
And when you said it the first time, I wanted to say something,
Right.
but he's not religious.
Right, and that's kind of what I want to hear, but there's like once again kind of that stigma attached to it, and it's like the judgmental looking down, and I've never once felt that being around you, which is really cool. So how do you balance that out? How do you?
I'd say first of all, the Lord has given me a revelation of myself that without Him, there's no difference between me and anybody else. That's probably the first thing. We're just people, and people are prone to failures and weaknesses. My life has been blessed from childhood because of my parents having the presence of the Lord. My parents were real. I think that if I was going to sum it up, it'd be, that balance of being able to preach Jesus, lead people to Jesus, and still relate to them on an everyday life that's what Jesus is. Jesus is not religious. If he was here, he talked to the fishermen, and he also had a doctor in one of his apostles. And interesting enough, he didn't even give the first message to preach to the one that was highly educated. He gave it to the dumbest guy in the group, which was Peter. So, I find that the Lord is just be real, and it causes us to all be in the same boat. We need the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
Just because I was never addicted to drugs or alcohol doesn't make me better than somebody else. It actually makes me thankful that I never had to endure and go through some of the things that they went through. But seriously, we're all in some sort of an addictive nature without a deliverance or help or healing. So
I was just talking about that. I had a friend come up into our NA meeting earlier tonight, and he struggles with not really have an addiction problem at all, but he struggles with depression. But when I was sitting there talking with him this afternoon, everything he's saying, I'm like, yep. I hear this the whole time. I'm like, why don't you come up? I think you'll feel better. He seemed excited about it, but
I
don't wanna-
find that with addiction, if you really I've had to look at, I've followed the 12-step programs. And when I started doing that, I had to really look at myself and I had to really dig down deep on why I was addicted. And I started using drugs and alcohol to self-medicate from anxiety and depression. And that was, I didn't realize it at the time that that's what I was doing, but now I understand that that's what I was doing. So honestly, a lot of us suffer from mental illness, and a lot of people don't want to discuss that. mental illness is usually the root cause of our addiction. And when we start treating our mental illness in a healthy way and we start taking care of it, the addiction started to go away from me. Once I started really focusing on my anxiety and depression, my traumas, and really taking the power away from that, that's when I started healing and I started looking towards faith. And that my faith and these meetings and doing stuff like this became my medication. That's when I started medicating myself in a different way. And that's how I started treating my depression. I feel like people need to start treating their depression, but not necessarily with medications, but maybe with some like real self work, getting with people, like coming to these meetings, talking to people, going, having faith, prayer, meditation, all of that. That's the medication I need to stay sober.
And that's kind of what I gathered talking.
The balance.
Sitting there going, I'm like, you're talking like an addict or an
Yeah.
alcoholic without
Yeah.
the drugs or alcohol
Yeah.
in there. That he just hadn't had that part thrown in there yet.
Yeah.
But the part that I love that you just said was, you're real. I think that's what
Mm-hmm.
dragged me towards you, and I think the same thing with you, Jim. You're real. You're genuine. It brings it over
Honest.
and
Yeah.
honest, and I think like that part of the balance too. But that real thing, like so many people try to like fake stuff, and like see like a lot of people I meet that are in clubs or whatever. It's like they wouldn't admit and be honest and real enough to sit down and do something like this because they got to keep that perception and all that stuff. So
They don't know how
like,
to be vulnerable.
yeah, and
They have that pride, that
and
ego that we can't crush.
yeah,
I'm very vulnerable right now. I'm uncomfortable. I gotta tell you, like in a setting like this, like
But that's what we've been taught in those meetings is to be vulnerable and to crush our pride and our ego, to stop feeding it.
I thought when you asked me about this, it would help me grow, and if it could help somebody else, like it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just when I'll give you an example of like being real with like Jim being real. You mentioned the fact that he's a member of the Hells Angels. He said something to me a couple of weeks ago, and it's not something you would think would go with the culture of the Hells Angels. But when you are real and you love people genuinely, not manipulation involved, not trying to trick them, deceive them, or get something out of them.
Mean something, yeah.
He said to me about an individual he was working with. He said, Dave, he said, all that kid needs is somebody to love him. Now, you think about that term. Who would have ever thought they would be looking in the eyes of a Hell's Angel telling me that all that kid needs is some good love? And yet, to me, I was like, amen.
Yes,
That's
yes,
the truth.
yes.
That
Yeah.
genuine love for people and genuinely caring, not this surface love that
Mhm. Just to look good for somebody else.
people who wouldn't want that.
yeah, no, they're not seeing the fakeness out there. There's a lot of fakeness, and I mean, I think anybody in any situation can be genuine, can love, can be healing, and all that. And you talk about uncomfortable. I feel you. I'm starting to get comfortable with sitting in here.
I've
But
never
it's-
gotten comfortable.
It's taken
sitting
a
in
little
here.
while, but like you, I tend to push myself to things that are uncomfortable now, especially if they're good things that are uncomfortable.
absolutely.
It's the growth. It's the things that I didn't do before. It was really easy to do drugs. It was really easy to drink and stuff. Now challenging myself to do things that are hard, that kind of get off on it a little bit these days and stuff like that. And it's really cool to bring people in and have that. But yeah, and, it's been really good to get to know both of you. And so like I've seen when I go to your church, I look around and I'm going, 30, 40, 50% of these people look like they probably have had a lot of the same issues I had or some sort of issue. And I watch the respect that they have for you, the respect they have for others, the respect they have for everybody walking in, the love that they generally show in their heart. And I mean, some of these people are people I party with, some of the people I've heard stories about. I mean, just like Jim, I've heard my fair share of stories, and then I meet this guy, and it's like, it's amazing. And I mean, I never really quite thought, oh, well, I'm going to invite a pastor to come on and talk about addiction and this because it's supposed to be sitting there. But it seemed so awesome. I mean, I haven't really seen anybody work with people quite like you have. I mean, it seems like that a lot of that has almost been your calling. I mean, I'm looking at a
Yeah.
very small sample, but it's amazing.
I know that when I first met Pastor, well, the first time I met him, it just went right over my head. Actually, I met you coming out of Hannaford. I was wearing a Trump hat.
Okay.
And you immediately were like, I like your hat.
Okay.
Something like that. Yeah. And, and I had forgotten about that because you actually stopped and introduced yourself and said that you were a pastor. And I just went right over my head. I didn't
I
remember
remember
that
it.
until Sue Grace actually talked about meeting you in Hannaford. And that's what triggered that memory. But I had in recovery first met you at GRCC at the gym. And I didn't know you were a pastor when I saw you there. And you were like, I mean, you were going from one thing to the next and to the next and to the next. And I'm like, holy crap, I gotta keep up with this guy. Like, you had me so motivated. I was like, I wanted to work even harder, but there was something about you that drew me to you. Like, I just kept, I don't know, and then you just kind of came over and you introduced yourself. And then, you shook my hand and stuff and said that you were a pastor. I'm like, you're the pastor that JD goes to. And that was it. That was like, I don't know. After that, I was just kind of like, I want more of that. And I was watching JD change and grow. And because of him going to your church. And it took me a little while to get there, but I knew I had made a decision, I think this past fall. And I was like, thought I was getting a lot from this 12-step programs, but I needed something more spiritually to grow. I'm so glad I went to your
I
church.
see God using me like that 12-step program because not being an alcoholic or a drug addict, I really never caught the concept of any of these, like the AA meetings. And I went because I'm friends with Glenn, and I went and with him and one other guy. I don't know how many names we're supposed to mention. It was another guy.
That's okay. You can.
Okay. And then there was another man that I won't mention that I went, to celebrate their so many years of sobriety or so many months of sobriety. And so I've been now to 3 AA meetings mostly to celebrate with them. And I listen to, the steps, and there's some parts of that, what they do that are so biblical, that support Kayleigh mentioned, and I came home telling my wife, I was like, they're operating in some biblical fashions, whether they know it or not.
Right.
Supporting one another. That's huge in a community. That's what Jesus tells us to do. But Jesus tells us a story in dealing with people that are either addicts or seem to be at the hurtful part of life and pushed aside by society because of it. Jesus tells a story that he caused a big party for a wedding party, and he invited people to come. And the Bible says that all of the neighbors and the friends said, I'm too busy. I got, my new farm, I got a new wife, and they wouldn't come. And Jesus was teaching us as a parable or principle of what the kingdom's going to be like. He said, go into the places where you find the hurting. He actually uses terminology like the hurting, the halt, the maim, those people that are broken, and go get them to come because my house is going to be full. And the Bible says that they went in. And I personally feel like a lot of what Jesus is doing is these people that seem to have sometimes everything together and their life is always honky-dory. They don't really desire God. But God is reaching for people that have come from the most broken messes. And he's making and doing some of the most beautiful things with people that you would least expect it. And that kingdom of God is going to be full of people that were down and out. And,
that were once broken. Yeah.
That were,
I said one time that the 12 steps or AA led me to my faith, but that's not correct. I thought about that after and I was like, oh, that's not right. I was like, God led me to AA so I could get back to God. Like, that's what happened. God led me into that AA room so that I could do those programs and get back to God because you need that. You need that.
And I would say the same thing. Like, going in AA led me back to God. I went to Catholic school and everything else. I hated it. And I kind of hated God for it. It was just so much jammed in my face. My son goes up to church with you, my 13-year-old, and he's kind of a little and now he gets a little bored or whatever. And I looked at him like, I'm not going to force you to go. That was forced upon me.
Right.
At only when it was convenient to my parents, it was forced on me to go.
Yeah.
And I resented it for that fact, missing stuff and whatever. So I'm not going to do that. But I just hear the welcoming approach you have, and yeah, seeing that in there. But so NA led me back to it. But let me ask you this, Jim. Like, so if you wouldn't have gone through, or like I use the phrase all the time, gone to hell, because I mean, like,
That's
I feel
where
like
we were in hell. Like,
would you
legit.
think you could ever been this compassionate person that's reaching out, helping others, and all that if you hadn't ever suffered?
No, absolutely not,
No.
man. I've been down a rocky road, and I think about that all the time, like how I ended up here. And I've had a stint in recovery in my late 20s, and things got so good in my life, I thought I was cured, you know what I mean? I didn't need no spiritual nothing. And I filled the God hole with shiny stuff, and it didn't work out too well for me. I ended up going back out for like 5 years, and I spent the first half of my 30s just the unmanageability and complete chaos. I was a vortex of bad news. Like everywhere I went, it was bad. Looking back, the people I hurt and stuff. I feel like I got an obligation now to like help anybody and everybody that wants help or that comes across my path, man. Because I haven't had a bad day. I mean, in so long, like even with my father passing, like I just stormed right through it, man. Like I just trudged right through it. And shortly after my dad dying is when I ended up started going to church. Another friend of mine from Alcoholics Anonymous was going there, and it's kind of how it works. Like he got me going there, and then I told some other people I was going, and they come in, and we just want to spread the good, the light, man. Like
The light, yes.
I believe in Jesus Christ, and He saved my life, man.
He saved my life too, amen.
And I think about it every day, all day, really, at work, and I can't. I'm so grateful. Like, man, I don't know if there's anything I couldn't face at this point in time. It was difficult. There was a point in time in my life where I was pretty down and out and depressed, and I didn't know what my purpose on this planet was. But I got a little bit of a purpose, and it's to keep God first. I got a list, and in my truck, I carry that list with me every day, and it says right at the top, more God, less Jim, keep God first. I got to remind myself every day of that.
Good.
And it gets easier every day. The further away from a drink and myself, the better I get. And I just
I heard somebody say in the meeting a couple of weeks ago, and I can say his name because Glenn doesn't mind. Glenn said in the meeting that he said that his relationship, if he's striving each day to be closer to God, he's good. But if he finds himself kind of like not really
regressing,
yeah, and he's not being, he's not doing his prayer, he's not doing his meditation, that's when he's feeling the worst. So as long as every day he's doing those things that you just mentioned, like always remembering like to keep pursuing God, then he's having a good day. And that's true. I feel that. If I go a couple of days and I'm not really, following my routine where I do my prayer and stuff, because I'm doing prayer all day long. I don't stop. It's constant. But if I have a day where I'm like slacking on that, it's like I feel it.
right?
It's crazy how much I feel it. And what you said, I have the same, like what you asked Jim about if I hadn't have gone through that hell, if I hadn't endured the darkest times of my life and broken like that, I couldn't be compassionate and caring like I am today. I know I couldn't. I know I couldn't be genuine about it. I don't think I could. I had to go through all that to really be real about it.
I agree the same thing myself. It gave me purpose going through there, seeing the dark times, and kind of came out of it. And the more I kind of program, like I said, kind of led me to God. But all of a sudden, I felt like I had more of a purpose. I still am not quite sure what it is. I mean, I feel like I'm tracking it out somewhat, getting involved with them in and all that, and but I feel more confident that He's going to continue to present it to me every day, and it's going to end up where I need to be. Now, some days I get ahead of myself and a little frustrated, and I all of a sudden I have expectations. I get myself into trouble with this and that. I want to hurry it up. The balance, but that's good. But one thing I just kind of uh, heard talking about is like when you started going to church, you went over with somebody else, and then like some people kind of followed you over, and it's like that almost security blanket. So quick little story last night. I decided I was going to be a plumber, which I'm not very good with any of that stuff. So like I sent a picture to Jim. I'm like, is this the right thing? He's like, yep, you're right. I'm like, is it simple? He goes, well, it is. But if you get into problems, give me a call. I'll talk you through it. Well, sure as shit, stupid little problems. I call him up. Well, next thing I know, I got a freaking sawzall cutting the faucet off my sink. He gave me the confidence to do it. But where I'm going with that is like just having him there was like a security blanket.
Yeah.
And it's like showing up to church with somebody. It's like having that person lead. And I feel like we're really lucky right now where it seems like there's a movement for recovery.
Yeah.
I think things have gotten so bad. People are starting to realize that it's really easy to avoid it when it's not right in front of you. Right now we have people dying left and right. I mean, that wasn't what they're dying of. Wasn't so much my drug of choice, but that doesn't matter right now. It's in everything. But it's become such a problem, and that's going that people can't just ignore it anymore.
I've noticed, I bet you have noticed how many more people are coming to your church.
Yeah, I would say a lot. It's been about 6 months,
Yeah.
6 to 8 months that
An influx.
an influx, and I think it goes through seasons like that. But I don't know why we do this in human nature, but it's like we wait till the darkest moment before we start to appreciate light.
Seriously. The real gratitude.
It's like it's like we keep blowing out the candles until finally we can't see anything. It's like, oh, really? I'd like to have a candle right now. And that's what happens in human nature and our culture of Western Maine. You know, I think I heard in one of those recovery meetings that 37 people died from overdose in Oxford County last year, and in 2015 it was only 9. So the increase in the massive amount of either overdoses and that's the ones we know of. You know, it has the culture and then we've got so many other problems that are contributing, whether it be the immorality in our school districts, the immorality in government, the immorality in religion, the immorality in various things. These families are broken apart, and you got all this culture that people are starting to, they turn to light. That's my point. You know,
And I think you're right. Then when you can shine that light without like stuffing it like right in their face and blinding them at the same time, which I feel is like that's what I feel like when I go to church. I'm seeing the light, but you're not putting it right in my eyes where it's blinding me. You're letting me choose how close I want to get to that light. That's cool. I know, like I was talking to somebody that was doing a successful learning program around here years back, and it was taken over by like another pastor, I believe he was called, or whatever, and it just got where it was too much pushed, like the spirituality aspect down the throat, and it kind of ruined it. And like that's where I'm so impressed. You meet people where they're at, and that just impresses me. I mean, you're confident enough in yourself, you're confident enough in your God and your Jesus and your religion where you don't have to sit there and do that and see that in. And I mean, I remember you from 25, 30 years ago when you used to come up to Black Mountain, and remember you being a strong person then, but it seems like you've, not that I knew you well then, but like how I feel like you've grown in that aspect too, and seeing that like how just passionate you are towards people, and not just like humble. Oh well, you got to go my way or I'm not passionate towards you. I see you being passionate towards everybody.
Very humble.
You're right, Seth. And I think some of that has to do with Jesus revealing what I'd be without him. You know, and it does humble you, but it also I think sometimes we can get manipulative and not know it. And again, I go back to the love Jesus has for me and causes that to flow through me is just without manipulation, without strings attached. So there's no obligation for me to try to make somebody do anything. Just let Jesus shine, and he'll do whatever that relationship is allowed to do. You know, it's a natural, organic progression.
So last Sunday I was at church, and you said something, and I'm terrible at like paraphrasing or quoting it or whatever, so maybe you clarified up afterwards, but it was on the gist of you're talking about everybody being sinners and blah, blah, and you go, there's a lot of people in here that have a lot of sin and blah, blah, and you stop for a second, you go, I think they're in the right place. It was just such a powerful message. You can probably repeat it a little bit
Yeah.
better,
I
but
know
you
what you're
brought it
saying,
with
yeah,
that
yeah.
excitement to it. And it was so
Sure.
right that it's like, you don't have to be perfect to be here. You don't have to be perfect for God to love you. And you may not even still be where you need to be yet, but you were just as welcoming to them. And I mean, it's right. It's in the right place. It's the same as these halls. When somebody comes
I was just
into
gonna say that's an
to
aim
any
for
that they
time.
use that day, they could use, and you can notice it, but it's like, you're in the right place.
You're in the right place. Keep coming back. We say that at the beginning of our meeting. We say, if you've used today, good. You're here. You're in the right place.
I noticed that about those AA meetings. It
Yeah.
made me, I went from always having somewhat of a respect for those meetings to
Mhm.
my hat's off to, the platform, because I watched men. I counted in the last meeting I was in. 80% of the people in the room were men. And they were opening their mouth and talking about their failures and weaknesses. You realize what kind of an atmosphere you have to create to get a man to say, hey, I got some problems. I can't even do that sometimes as a pastor. I bring him into marriage counseling, and it's the woman that's like, yeah, they're just telling all the laundry, and the man's over there saying nothing. But to see that done in an AA means that there's a culture there.
Yes.
And I think that's a God culture. I think we should feel safe with Jesus.
Sharing our
to be able
testimony.
to be testimonies and without judgment or without condemnation.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we're kind of wrapping up here, but one more thing to talk about before. You still have a bike, correct?
Yeah.
And I know Jim's into bikes. I just got another old bike. I got to do a little work to get up and going, but so I want to bring across. I think I talked to you before about doing a poker run, but it's like some people it's like poker run that's still addiction, gambling, all that. I think we ought to get together and organize just that ride for recovery.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And I see you two right in the front of the pack leading this ride. Hit some
Man.
recovery centers and eat some good food.
I'm in.
I think we should try and do that for this summer. And I hear you guys into it. And
I'd love to.
I think it'd be really cool. And I mean, it's just the diversity that you see and the vulnerability. Like you were saying, watching people be vulnerable, grown men, tough men,
Yeah.
being vulnerable. I mean, it
That's the key to recovery right there. If we don't be vulnerable and share our story, share our experience, strength, and hope, then it doesn't work.
But I'd just like to thank you guys for sitting
Yes,
down. I know
thank you.
it can be uncomfortable and everything else, but hopefully this helps somebody.
Good for him.
Amen.
I think someone's out there gonna hear this. They needed it.
Just today, talking to somebody in the parking lot, I've known her for a long time, but as she was leaving, she said, the reason I'm here is from watching this podcast.
Oh, right
She goes,
on.
it gave me
Wow.
be brave enough to come over. You're the one that brought her in the first time. But, I mean, I've known her for a while, but she was like, that's what, she goes, I've thought about it for a while. She was worried about the stigma. She was working in a pharmacy, blah, blah, blah. But even after, she was still scared of it. And she goes, that gave me the comfortability to do it. And it's like right there, hearing that one person, it's like,
Yeah.
you know what, it's worth
Mm-hmm.
getting out my time. It's worth being nervous, sitting down for a minute.
Yeah.
It's worth potentially making a fool out of myself.
Amen.
Being
Amen.
a little tired. Because
Yeah.
I get a little tired on these nights that we film, but it's totally worth it.
But yeah,
It is
and
worth it.
thank you guys so much for joining
Thank
us.
you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.